The other type of dodge and burn is when you shape or contour the subject's face, and this is often called global dodge and burn. Now, with the push towards more realistic retouching in today's retouching standards, I typically stay away from changing or contouring a person's shape with global dodge and burn unless it's requested by the client. For the local dodge and burn, I usually do this after the pixel work has been done. And this is so that you know that the information below your dodge and burn layers will not change. So as mentioned, it's really important to do your pixel work first. Then it can also be helpful, and for the purposes of this video lesson, I have this pre-prepared, but it can also be helpful to have your overall color grade or color corrections on. This is because the irregularities can be made more or less visible by your overall color corrections. If you have strong contrast on your image, for instance, that might mean that it shows up the irregularities in the skin a lot more. And if you're brightening your image a lot, for instance, that might actually smooth out the irregularities slightly and you don't have to dodge and burn as much. So it can speed up your retouching process to have the overall color corrections on, or it can just let you know that you need to spend a bit more time if you apply the overall color grading. And if you are, for instance, lifting your image and the dodge and burn needs to be less, if you don't have that on, you can actually make your image look too flat with your dodge and burn, and it can look over retouched if you don't have that color correction showing you what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. If you apply the color grading after your dodge and burn, it can affect some areas. Above my color grade layers, I add a gray layer set to color mode. This is at the top of my layer stack. I just quickly get a gray layer and I set it to color. And this desaturates the image, which just takes away the distraction of color. And basically, I don't use the black and white layer, and I don't use a hue saturation layer pulled all the way down, because this method, this gray layer set to color, gives the best representation of luminosity values in comparison. So a hue or saturation layer or a black and white layer, they typically don't give as good a representation of luminosity values as this gray layer does. So it helps me to see the irregularities better, or a truer representation of them. So I'm just going to then add another curve. So I just add a slight darkening curve, and I typically like to darken the shadows slightly more than the highlights. And this will help me again to see the irregularities better. I then group these two and I take them above my edit group and I call them check, because on my checking layers to help me see the irregularities more easily. So now I'm ready to start retouching. If we go into our dodge and burn, I'm going to just zoom in and start approaching the areas that are most obvious to me. I typically start with the face, and once I've done the face, I do the rest of the body. There's no rhyme or reason for this, it's just how I like to work. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to speed this up so that you don't have to watch this whole process. So let's just zoom in a little further and get started. And I think I'm going to stop round about there. Some of the things, just some helpful tips whilst dodging and burning, are to turn your checking layers on and off. And then I also sometimes change, as you can see I've done here, I sometimes change my curve from normal to multiply, just in the brighter areas that I can see what's going on. I like to flick back and forth so that I can see without the check layers on. I sometimes check what it looks like without my color layers on. And then I like to flick back and forth between the dodge and burn layers and dodge and burn image, just to see what I'm doing and make sure that I'm happy that I'm not going too far or missing anything. Sometimes things pop out to you that wouldn't have popped out before. The other thing I do is to zoom in and zoom out of the image to varying degrees so that I can get different perspectives on the image, and it shows up different sizes of irregularities the more you zoom in and out. So those are all things that help me to just get a better view of what's going on as I'm retouching. If you are going to be doing global dodge and burn, I would recommend doing it after your local dodge and burn has been done, and I'd recommend using a separate set of curves or a separate grey layer for this. And this is so that if you go too far with your global dodge and burn and you need to roll it back or brush areas out, you aren't going to be brushing away the information that you've got on your local dodge and burn curves. So I would just recommend doing, let's just add a separate group here. So let's do a lightning curve, and I'm just going to do a simple darkening curve for this one, just for the purposes of this video lesson. And let's label this G dodge and G burn for global burn and global dodge. And then let's label this G dB. So if you're going to be doing global dodge and burn, I would recommend looking at makeup artists and how they contour the face. This would give you a good understanding of what areas they lighten and what areas they darken to enhance the shape of the face. This is, again, not something I like to do, but just for the purposes of showing you that it is an option. You would typically do things like enhance the brighter areas and enhance the darker areas. So you would, for instance, burn the cheeks and maybe burn around the side of the face. And then you would burn the sides of the nose just to give the appearance of slimming the nose. And you might dodge the ridge of the nose. And you might dodge the forehead. I mean, this image is lit very well, so it doesn't need this. But you might, again, dodge this area of the cheek here and dodge this area here. And all you're really doing is enhancing the shape. But to me, I find that this technique tends to look overdone and fake, in my opinion. And if you don't have a good understanding of human anatomy, I wouldn't recommend doing it. And you've also got to have a good understanding of how light falls on a face. You don't want to change the lighting. You want to enhance it. But I'm just going to delete these because I don't typically use global dodge and burn. Beginner retouchers can often make the mistake of over-retouching. And this is usually done in the dodge and burn phase of the retouch. So some typical mistakes are to remove the lines under the eyes, these lines here, or to remove the smile lines. Another typically over-contouring is a big mistake that beginner retouchers do make. So you don't want to change the shape too much. You don't want to change features too much. You really just want to smooth over those gradients and luminosity irregularities to create a pleasing looking image. Knowing when to stop is a skill that takes time and practice, and an overly polished retouch actually takes less skill and experience than a tasteful retouch. You want to keep your pause, you want to keep the reality of your image, and this can be done with a tasteful dodge and burn. And dodging and burning is usually the most time-consuming part of any retouch, especially beauty retouch. But if it's done well and you take care with it and you learn how human anatomy works and how lighting works, it'll have a big impact on your image, and it's often how you can tell a good retoucher apart from the rest. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video lesson on dodge and burn. As you can see, there are many ways to do things, from using a gray layer to using curves, from using different opacity to using different brush settings. It's all really what works for you and what you find most comfortable to do. Just remember to do your zooming in, your zooming out, your flicking on your check layers, your going back and forth between your unretouched and retouched image, and just help yourself to not go too far or to not stop too early. And you'll eventually get there with something that you like, a style that you like to dodge and burn in. And I'm going to be honest, when I first started dodging and burning, it took me a while to see the skin irregularities with clarity and to know which ones to remove and which ones to leave to keep some reality in the image. So more than anything with dodge and burn, I would just recommend lots and lots of practice.